Nobody really knows when the world became this way. The city continued to expand on its own, and humans were seen as illegal residents and exterminated. All of that happened long before I was born.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Danny here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Blam. So, spelled as blame, it's pronounced Blam, and from what Miguel told me when he first showed me this series is the mangaka here, Tsutomu Nihei. He believed that this is how Blam was spelled in English. I think that's what the story is, and that's why it's spelled like this, but it's pronounced Blam, last I checked. And yes, like I said, Tsutomu Nihei is the mangaka for this. That name should be familiar. I've talked about his other work before, Manga and Opossums. Really like those series here. And this is, I believe, his first series he's ever done here. Published in 96 to 2003 in the magazine called Afternoon. And we got some big hitters in here like Vinland Saga, Mushishi, Blade of the Immortal, Parasite. You know, a lot of nice Mysterious Girlfriend X. And of course, a bunch of his other series are in here as well. And this was a monthly series with a total of 66 chapters. And I'm going to go ahead and get into the premise of this series by going off of the synopsis here on my anime list. Because I was trying to think of a way to describe what the story is. But reading this one, to not get into spoiler territory, I think is the best one here. So let's go ahead. In an enormous steel labyrinth riddled with horrifying creatures, humanity is forced to isolate itself in small enclaves while living in constant fear of its annihilation. In this dystopia, only a strange young man known as Killy is brave enough to traverse its unforgiving territories. And there's more to go into, but we find that stuff out later in the story. And, you know, I don't know how popular this is. I know it had a mini anime series, and then there was also the 2017 Netflix CG movie that I watched, but I don't know how big it is. So if you want to experience it yourself, that's as light as I'm going to go as far as spoilers, because there is a lot of interesting stuff here that can get pretty deep into what's going on. So like I said, our main character here is Killy. He is a human wandering this enormous structure, this, like it says, the steel labyrinth, right? And he's traveled a long way. It's ever expanding. We don't know how far it goes, similar to how the ending of Manga was. It's just endless, you know, and the depth that this, you know, giant city, this landscape has is, you know, there's really no hope for you to reach the outside world, basically. That's how massive this place is. And, you know, the abstractness of the sci-fi is what Nihei really likes. And I'm a big fan of this type of abstract sci-fi as well. You know, you could do so much with how wild you want to get, but keep a concrete story. And I believe this man does it to perfection. So he's traveled a long way. At one point, he meets a group of other humans, and he mentioned like, oh, you know, I traveled 5,000 levels below. You know, just the absurdity of the scale of which we're going through this character's journey plays a big part into how he is as a character and all that. You know, so he's not the only main character, though. We have another one, Sibo, who shows up at a certain point in the series, and she becomes a vital role to the story, and they're both great in their own right. And with Killy especially, I like how his character is. It's very much a reflection of what the world is, and that goes to show in the beginning of the series how it's quote-unquote written until he encounters somebody. And the way it is quote-unquote written is there is no dialogue for a good while, and it makes sense. Right? He's traveling by himself in this mechanical wasteland, traversing higher and higher, hoping to find the thing he's looking for. Why does he need to talk? So there's no dialogue at all until he bumps into something that can talk, right? Because there's like robots and all that throughout this place. And the way Nihei tells the story visually is fantastic as well. You could feel the type of atmosphere this world is presenting based on his art here. It is his earliest work, I believe. So we do have some of that, early work. Look at One Piece and Fairy Tail and all that, how like the art changes over time. And, reading his other work, in a sense, like backtracking through his art style, like you could tell, like, yeah, this is old. Mainly like the facial structure of the characters kind of gives it away. But man, like the grittiness, the despair, just the loneliness that it has, right? There's a fantastic panning shots of the architecture, just whatever floor we're on, to show the scope of what we're dealing with. It's all so high quality. I really love it, man. Just the way he can tell the story visually for a long time before we even have some interactions with other characters. Really great. And another great part to add to that is when we finally get dialogue with new characters, the story acts like there's been dialogue the entire time. It doesn't try to make a big emphasis on Killy talking or just like throwing too much at once. It's all a natural flow, as if, yeah, there's just been dialogue this entire time, and there has been with the artwork. It's really great. And so, yeah, he's just traveling, and we encounter a lot of lore that's present and very minimal about what happened and how we got here, which for this type of scale of post-apocalyptic, dystopian future, it's fine, because it was so far back, there's really no point in bringing it up unless it's a crucial part to the story. And that's exactly when it shows up. So perfect timing when we learn more about the environment. And, as he's traveling along, we see cyborgs that he's fighting, enemies to humans, and then we're eventually introduced to the silicone life, and they're sort of like the main threat, the main antagonistic group that's involved here. And then as well as like some other key big players from behind the shadows that very rarely show up. And it just really shows you like, oh, there's even more going on as far as the scale of this world. Like there's still so much you can do. Like you could just keep going higher and higher and, eventually kind of get to a place where that stuff will matter. But due to the story and how everything plays out, we don't really get that. And I think that's fine. It does leave you wanting more, right? To like, well, who's the boss? Who is the authority? Let's actually see these people. That's not important. What's important is what Killy is trying to find, and that is the net terminal gene. Now, what is that? Basically, that is a gene within humans that have not been contaminated by this contagion that was the start of all the problems that we're seeing now in the world. And that is Killy's soul journey, is to find this and basically jumpstart humanity back from there. Because that plays a vital role that they explain in the series that I won't get into, for spoiler's sake. We're introduced to the other main character, Sibo, and she is sort of like the opposite, right? She's the scientist, so she's the brains. Killy, he's very stoic, one-track mind, we know his morals and all that, but we know who he is. So he's the bronze as well, because he has this ridiculous weapon, a one-shot type of kill thing. And they have a great dynamic, I think. It's one of those where their relationship doesn't need to be fleshed out, but we still understand what's going on between them. And I think that's really great writing when it comes to these types of characters in this world. Because when we get into stuff like the Netflix movie, for example, right, there's a human colony that we find that's taken from the manga, and we have characters like Zuru in there, and the way the adaptation for the film does it is it does that stuff where, let's actually connect to these characters in, I guess, a human way type of thing, whereas Killy and Sibo, like, we don't need to see that at all. They have their objectives. We understand the type of characters they are. So let's just move on. You know, the one thing that Nihei likes to do in this series is not waste time with stuff that's not important to the story and the world that he's created here. So it's really high quality writing, and also like just the way he introduces other characters that come in, like Sanakan. She is sort of the main antagonist, I guess you could say. Like, she's the face of the threat that we're facing. She shows up a lot. And then we also get like the introduction enemies into the new Silicon Life, like P-Cell and Ivy. And, you know, we know what's going on. So let's not delve into like a bunch of jargon that's just going to make us run in circles. You know, he understands the pacing of this series, right? Because it is a monthly manga, like I said. So he understands what he has to do to keep you engaged. And I think that's another important thing to note, is that because it's monthly, he had more time to figure out how he wants to tell the story, right? So I would say you can read this pretty quick, right? 66 chapters, it's nothing. And especially when there's no dialogue, you could just, boom, zoom like minutes at a time. But a lot of stuff that gets introduced, especially when Sibo is explaining or is figuring stuff out, you could get lost. And a part of that also kind of has to do with the art style as well. As much as I love the art, it can get jumbled and messy, right? Because again, 96 era, early work from a mangaka. So what does that all mean? There's a lot of inking, shadows, you know, a bunch of toners are being used. And with the rough environment that we're dealing with, and just the way the enemies are designed, you could really tell like it's been a long time. They look grotesque. They just look maniacal and all that. It can get in the way visually. Like, there's a lot of, I guess you could say, noise. Like, it's all great art, you know, just seeing what he can do and what he likes to design, I think is great for these cyborgs and Silicon Life beings. But when it gets very heavy in the action, you can get lost. And then while that's happening, there's lore stuff going on that could kind of get complicated. So you really could get lost and not figure out what's going on. I had to slow down myself because some really important stuff was being mentioned and I was getting lost just a little bit. So basically what Nihei is trying to say is, guys, let's just slow down. Let's absorb this world. Let's get immersed. One complaint, I guess you could say, for the writing is the way the series ended. In the final few chapters, it did kind of feel rushed because so much was happening so fast. And I think part of that just has to do with where we were at towards the end goal and how it's so important, right, for both factions here, our protagonist and the antagonist, that it just has to go right now, just right now. And plus the scale that, you know, as we climbing higher and getting more into dangerous territory, the bigger the threats are, the stronger they are, kind of thing. So the way it ended, it did kind of feel a little rushed. It definitely felt abrupt on the final chapter, right? The last few pages. It kind of just, like, huge time gap. We're kind of lost into what's going on. You know, we get some narration from characters thinking, well, what happened? What's going on? And then, you know, we get some sharp cuts with these panels, and then the final two panels show, you know, basically what happens at the end, and then just boom, it's over. I understand some people's complaints with that. I've seen people try to draw stuff that happened before and after that, like what they think would happen, but I think that's just how Nihei likes to write this story particularly, because it's, you know, it's like heavy set on, guys, this is the reality we're living in. What are you going to expect? And I think that's one thing that the Netflix movie failed to grab, because as I was watching the Netflix movie, I was like, oh wow, the writing makes this story get a happy ending. That's not what this series is about. There's a lot of death and sorrow and emotionless guilt that goes on in this, you know, in the series. As you know, we encounter people we see the disparity in their lives because this is not a good place to live. And just to see the happy side of it, the positive side of it, it threw me off for the movie. So if you're going to watch the movie, definitely read the manga first and then, just check it out later. So that way at least you can understand what they try to do. Because it's similar to Gantz, to where in Gantz O, right, the CG movie that's also on Netflix, they just took a very popular arc and they made it a self-contained story. And here they kind of did the same thing. They picked the best spot to make it as best of a movie as they can, because I can understand how hard it would be for this kind of setting to be fairly popular as a movie. And so they chose when they found these human colonists, right, with the main character Zuru. She had a lot of attention in the film. And it's, I understand what they did. So at the end of the day, it is what it is. Definitely prefer the manga over that any day. There is one other character I do want to point out. I don't want to butcher his name, but it's like a Russian name, and he's pretty cool. The way he's introduced is he's very similar to Killy, but he's also more human, you could say. He's a little different. He's more relatable than what Killy is. And I think that was an interesting piece to bring in, as it really reflects Killy's story, because that's what this is at the end of the day. It's his journey, and we've been with it the whole time, but then just to see like the other perspective of how this story would go, I thought was pretty cool. Moving on again to the art, man. It's so good. It's, again, his early work, but still it's visually stunning. The architecture, panning shots, it's, wow, breathtaking for a lot of it. And the designs that he chooses for these cyborgs and silicone life beings, again, just the grotesqueness, the horror aspects that we could get into some of this stuff. Very weathered by time, just the way he does action pieces as well. And like you could just feel the emotions when you see some of this stuff. It's really crazy work. And the designs, again, just so out there. That's what I really like when it comes to like super abstract sci-fi, is just do what you want, basically, right? And what I really like about the mangaka himself, Nihei, is how different the 3 series that I've read from him are, right? So with the Possums, it's more sketch-like, and then in Biomega, it's more noir-esque. And then here it's just super gritty. And they all feel different. They all complement the story and the tone very well. And especially with the coloring, they're all very different as well. And here it doesn't distract you, right? The colors are dark in tone. It's not overly flashy, because that's not what this world is about. Even with some of the designs for the enemies, it's exactly what you would expect, and it's very of the era, right? What year did I say? 96. And then when I found out who published it out here in the West in English, it was Tokyo Pop. It all just clicked, and I'm like, of course, it makes so much sense. It's so good. It's really fantastic, man. I can't gush enough about the art. It's very stunning to look at. I mean, again, just the facial structure of the characters. You learn to grow. They do change here and there, but it's good stuff overall. Like it's really fantastic to just look at, especially like certain pieces that are just like the chapter covers or very important shots. So good. Some of the best I've seen for a seinen. Just overall any. Like Nihei is becoming one of my favorite mangakas now. He's one of those names that I'm looking out for, and I'll definitely be back talking about his other work. So my closing thoughts on this series is, it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite sci-fi stories I've read in a long time. Definitely take your time. Like I said, the whole point is to you being immersed into the world, noticing all the stuff and how they connect. And as far as the movie goes, just, again, read it first. Don't let the movie be your first experience, I don't think. I mean, you kind of can, because it doesn't show things that would spoil you when you read the manga. So that's the one plus it had, because it's, trying to be a self-contained story. And other than that, man, we're going to be closing off this episode with some interesting music. The soundtrack for the movie was not the best. It was too anime, does not fit the theme at all for the series. But I found on Bandcamp one Von Hohenheim dropped an album this year, actually, to my surprise. And it's €7. It's like 8 something, in US dollars. 16 tracks, 50 cents a track. It's basically a steal. But it's an ambient themed album and heavily inspired by Blam. All the track names tie into the story. Listening to it, I was thinking, this is it. This is exactly what the manga is trying to capture. It did it perfectly. It's really good stuff. I recommend checking it out. So we'll be ending on one of those tracks right here. That's going to be it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to talk about more Blam. What are your thoughts? unversedpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on social media, let you know when the latest episodes drop. That's unversedpodcast anywhere you go. Thanks again, guys. Catch you on the next episode.